kind of important bit, getting paid, and how that happens. So when a track's used, both the composer and the library, whoever that may be, both receive a royalty. It's paid by a PRS in the UK. There's also ASCAP in America, BMI in America, I think SOCAN in Canada. They all do basically the same job. But in the UK, we use PRS. And as I mentioned, the amount of royalty varies by the length of the use. So all kinds of factors, the length, the channel, the country, the time of day. I think they're kind of the big factors, but they all matter. So the upshot is, the more tracks you have out there, the better. Talking about the lottery earlier on and how things are ordered, you know, if you just have one track in that 6,000, then your chances are pretty low. If you had 500 tracks in there, your chances are higher. I personally have got about 300 tracks now, just all earning various bits. But it's really important to just keep producing, particularly because it's not an instant gratification industry, library music. You've got to play the long game. And a part of that reason is because of the royalty delays, which can be fairly insane. A good example would be, let's assume you've started to write an album, a 10-track album, okay? Let's just assume it's taking you 3 months to write that album, just as an example. Okay, great, 3 months. And then you start pitching it to the libraries. Well, maybe they don't get back to you for a couple of months, because that can often happen. They're busy, they've got a backlog. You've just got to keep pestering them until maybe someone picks it up. So maybe 2-3 months down the line, they finally accept your album. Now you're at 6 months. That's okay, they've accepted the album, but then they've got to do the artwork, they've got to do the mastering, they've got to schedule it into their release schedule. And all of a sudden, you know, it's 4 months later before they release it. Now you're almost hitting a year since you started the album. Continuing on, let's assume that someone in the Netherlands wants to use one of the tracks off that album. Great. You know, they download it, they put it into their show, but that show might not be broadcast for another 3, 4, 5, 6 months. All of a sudden now you're at a year and a half. And then you've got the royalty streams, which are just exhausting. The Netherlands has to feed its royalties back into the PRS system, which can take months. You know, all of a sudden I've already lost track. Where am I? 2.5 years. And then PRS have to pay you out. And hypothetically, you might just miss the PRS cut-off and have to wait another 3 months before you get paid for that. Now you're potentially hitting 3 years before you see any royalties from the album that you started. Now that sounds mental, that's insane. And it's only insane for the first couple of years, because eventually you catch up. And as long as you don't pause and don't stop producing, your royalties catch up and you're away, you're off. But it's sort of one of the most important things to realise is, if you do start creating library music, is you're going to see shekels at first. Your royalty statement will come through, 2 quid, 3 quid, for fuck's sake, like, what was the point? But 3 years down the line, all of a sudden, bang, one track, 600 quid, one track, 800 quid, 300, and it's like, they all compile into a pretty reasonable royalty. Now, there can be a whole 3-year uni course and certainly a big lecture on the ins and outs of royalty streams and royalty sources. So I'm going to do this super top level. This is just basically a rough, in my experience over the past couple of years, a rough example of where my royalties come from. The most important thing is it's multiple income streams. There's not just one royalty that's paid out. You get it from various sources. So the first of those, and the sort of lion's share, for me, I should point out, these are my balls. Other people's balls might be bigger or smaller. This is just my experience. So PRS, 60%. Pretty significant. Basically everyone here, I think, knows who the PRS are. I also understand, if you're not a member already, that if you're under 25, I think it's something like 30 quid lifetime membership. And if you hit 25, I think that jumps to like 100. It's a bit of a no-brainer for me. If you're under 25, you should just join the PRS. It's a sensible thing to do before it jumps up in cost. MCPS and sync. I won't confuse you too much with what that royalty is, but generally in music there's 2 types of royalties. There's performance royalties and mechanical royalties. Mechanical royalties is a bit of a throwback from when things were sold physically, so vinyl, CD for example. When a copy of one of those was made, the Mechanical Copyright Protection Society would pay you a royalty for that copy. But that also exists in the digital world. When you get things placed on Spotify, iTunes, it all comes through as mechanicals. A little bit confusing as well, because something called sync licensing exists, which is slightly outside of the way performance royalties work, and that also gets paid in this bubble with MCPS. That doesn't get paid through PRS, that gets paid through the publisher. So the publisher will send me a royalty statement 2, 3, 4 times a year, depending on who the publisher is, and they'll pay my mechanicals. Maybe a bit confusing, but I'll leave it there for that one. Neighbouring rights is a funny one. I only found out about that one about 3 or 4 years ago, but it's a royalty that is paid to the performers of a track, or should be paid to the performers of a track. So if you're a guitarist, vocalist, drummer, whatever, you should be paid a performance royalty for performing on the track. Now, sadly, the PPL in the UK, who should be handling neighbouring rights, don't qualify library music writers for neighbouring rights. For some reason, it's just a decision that was made along the line that library music writers aren't performers, which is absolutely bonkers, because of course we are. We do all the work, you know. I play the guitar, I sing badly, I do some drumming, piano, whatever, so I should get paid that right. So sure enough, there are labels, companies throughout the world who handle neighbouring rights. I just had to sign away my rights from the UK company to a company in Texas, bizarrely, but they then pay me my neighbouring rights for all the territories that pay them, and it probably brings in, it's not vast amounts of money, a couple of 2-3 grand a year, but it's a great extra bit of income that I only discovered about 4 years ago. Writers' fees, that's so low, tragically, because not many people pay them. The bigger companies, namely Universal and Warner, will pay you £200 a track for a library track, which is great. If you're doing, say, a 10-track album, again, that's £2 grand, money in your bank. It's non-recoupable, you don't have to pay it back. That's just a flat-out writer's fee. But most labels don't do that. I'm actually amazed that Universal and Warner have kept it up, to be honest, given the way the world is at the minute. But I think it's their way of ensuring that they get the right kind of writer writing for them, and they can curate them and get the best possible writers, I think. And I also think there'd be absolute uproar if they stopped it, because it's been bedded in for years. But great if you can get them, but super rare, don't rely on them. Buyouts. Why is buyouts in red? Because it's a bit naughty. A lot of the labels have started deciding that they'll keep the performance royalties at a 50-50 split, but the mechanical royalties, instead of a 50-50 split, they want 75-25 to them. And for that pleasure, they'll pay you £250 for a track. So what's that, about £10 per percentage point. So what ends up happening is, again, let's use the album example. If you're doing a 10-track album for Universal or Warner, writer's fee 200, buyout 250, that's £4.5 grand to do an album. And now that is obviously wonderful, you know, as composers and writers, we want to be paid for our work. The kicker comes 2 or 3 years down the line when you see that one of those tracks that you got paid £250 for has earned you £2 grand, and you look at it and you go, oh, that should have been £4 grand, and you look at your 250 quid, and you look at your £2 grand missing money, and you go, that's why the labels are doing it. They know they can afford to just pay that upfront money, knowing that they'll get back multiples more in the future. So it's a bit naughty. It's kind of shitting on the composer. Some labels don't do it intentionally, which is great. Warner is one of them. They don't do buyouts. And I think there's a real danger of them starting to do it with performance royalties, but I think, again, there'd be absolute uproar. And the final ball is custom work. That can be a higher or lower percentage depending on the year. Custom work is basically TV titles that I do. The work for Radio 1 that I'm doing at the minute, that's custom work. Any bits and bobs like that. Maybe someone pays me to do a little podcast intro or something like that. That all fits into that kind of extra little bit of income. So yeah, multiple income streams. There's not just one royalty that gets paid throughout the years. All these little firings into the bank account, which is always good. Any questions about royalties? I tried to keep that brief, yes.
You turned down a buyout, or was it like an obligation if they would say?
Great, yeah, no, it's mandatory. Yeah, if you want, yeah. You can choose to do a full buyout, which I think they up to like £700. They buy you out of the whole 100% mechanicals, but you can't lower it. Yeah, it's in the contracts. Sadly, it's just it is what it is. Any other questions? Yeah.
Just one off the stream.
Sure.
Can you be paid multiple times for one track over the years if the episode airs more than once?
Yes, definitely. In fact, we kind of rely on it. Yeah, repeats are great. Yeah, definitely. I don't think there's a limit. What does happen is obviously if let's take the Top Gear example. You know, when it's first broadcast, you'll get the lion's share of the royalties because it's on the prime time repeats. But later on throughout the year, if it's just iPlayer, those royalties will shrink significantly. So if it's a big royalty to start with, it doesn't mean that it's going to consistently be a big royalty, even if it's the same show. It'll generally dwindle down to streaming levels, sadly.